The door clicked shut, and Elena Marino heard the lock turn behind her. She spun around, her heart slamming against her ribs, and found Dante Russo standing between her and the only way out. His dark eyes studied her, the way a man studies something he already owns. "You're mine," he said, his voice low and even, as if he were stating the weather instead of a threat. "Until this debt is paid, you don't leave this room without my permission." Elena's hands trembled, but she kept her chin lifted. She had walked into this club knowing the risk, knowing the stories people whispered about the man in front of her. Still, nothing had prepared her for the cold weight of his stare. "You don't understand what you're holding on to," she said. "This isn't the debt you think it is." Dante crossed the room slowly, each step measured, unhurried, the way a predator moves when it already knows the outcome. "Your father owed money to people who work for me. That debt didn't disappear when he died. It transferred to you. That's how this world works." "My father didn't owe you anything," Elena said. "If anything, your family owes mine." For the first time, something flickered behind Dante's composed expression, a crack in the wall he had built around himself. "Careful," he warned. "Words like that get people hurt in my world." Elena reached into her bag with shaking fingers and pulled out a worn envelope, its edges soft from years of being folded and unfolded. She held it out to him, refusing to let her hand shake, even though her whole body wanted to. "Before you decide what to do with me," she said, "read this. It's from your father." Dante's gaze dropped to the envelope, and for a moment he didn't move at all. He recognized the handwriting immediately, slanted and rushed, the same handwriting that used to sign birthday cards and homework permission slips decades ago. His father had died when Dante was 19, gunned down outside a restaurant that no longer existed. Dante had spent years building walls so thick that grief could no longer touch him. Now, a single envelope threatened to knock those walls down in seconds. "Where did you get this?" His voice had lost its edge, replaced by something rawer. "My father kept it hidden in his desk. I found it after his funeral, going through his things. I didn't understand what it meant until I read it 3 times. Elena's voice softened despite herself, seeing the way Dante's jaw tightened. "I came here today because I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't. I was afraid people like you would come looking for it eventually, and I wanted to be the one who explained it first." Dante took the envelope from her hand, careful, almost reverent, a strange gentleness in a man who had just locked a door and claimed ownership over another human being. He turned it over once, studying the faded ink of his father's name, written on the back flap, then looked up at Elena with a new kind of suspicion, one that had nothing to do with money, and everything to do with fear of what truth might do to the life he had built. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the leather chair across from his desk. It wasn't a request. Elena sat, her spine straight, refusing to let him see how close she was to shaking apart. She watched him circle behind his desk, watched him set the envelope down without opening it, his fingers resting on top as if he needed a moment before he could face whatever was inside. "You said your family thinks mine owes you a debt," Dante said finally. "Explain that. Now." "I don't know everything," Elena admitted. "My father never told me the details. All I know is what little he wrote in his own notes, and what that letter says. He mentioned something about a promise made between him and your father, a long time ago, something about protection and silence." Dante's eyes narrowed. "Protection from what?" "I don't know. That's why I brought you the letter instead of trying to explain something I don't fully understand myself." The room fell into a heavy silence. Outside the office, muffled music thumped through the walls of the club, a strange contrast to the tension coiling tighter and tighter between them. Dante studied Elena for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether she was telling the truth or performing an elaborate lie designed to save her own life. "You could be lying," he said. "You could have forged this to buy yourself time." "I could have," Elena agreed, meeting his eyes without flinching. "But I didn't. Open it and you'll see for yourself. That's not my handwriting, and I don't think you'd mistake your father's writing for anyone else's." Something about her steady confidence disarmed him more than any plea for mercy could have. Dante had expected tears, begging, maybe even threats. He had not expected quiet certainty from a woman who had every reason to be terrified. He finally broke the seal. His hands, so controlled a moment ago, betrayed the smallest tremor as he unfolded the pages inside. Elena watched his eyes move across the first lines, watched the color shift in his face, watched 2 decades of carefully built armor begin to strain at the seams. "This can't be real," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "It is," Elena said quietly. "I checked the handwriting against old photographs of documents from that time. It matches everything I could find." Dante read in silence for what felt like an eternity, his eyes flicking back and forth across lines that clearly meant more to him than she could fully grasp. When he finally looked up, his expression had changed entirely. The predator who had locked the door minutes earlier was gone, replaced by something more uncertain, more human. "You said you don't know the details," he said slowly, "but you must know something. Why would you risk walking into my club, alone, to hand me a letter that could destroy everything I've built?" Elena took a breath, steadying herself before she spoke. "Because I think the debt in that letter isn't the kind you settle with money. I think it's the kind that gets people killed if it stays buried much longer, and I would rather face you directly than wait for someone worse to come looking for answers." Dante set the letter down slowly, his fingers still resting against the paper as though it might vanish if he let go too soon. "You're either the bravest person I've met in years, or the most reckless." "Maybe both," Elena said. For the first time since she had walked into the room, something close to a smile tugged at the corner of Dante's mouth, though it vanished as quickly as it appeared. He walked to the window, looking out over the city lights scattered below, his back to her now, his shoulders tense with thoughts she couldn't see. "You should know," he said without turning around, "that people who bring me secrets about my family don't usually walk out of this building unharmed." Elena's pulse spiked, but she refused to let fear control her voice. "Then I suppose it's a good thing I'm not just anyone. I'm the person who can help you understand what that letter actually means, if you're willing to listen instead of assuming the worst." Dante turned back to face her, studying her with an intensity that made the room feel smaller. Whatever calculation was happening behind his eyes, Elena couldn't read it, and that uncertainty terrified her more than any direct threat could have. "You said this was locked," Elena said carefully, gesturing toward the door. "If I'm going to help you make sense of this, I need you to trust that I'm not your enemy." "Trust isn't something I hand out," Dante said. "Not in this life. Not to strangers who walk into my club, claiming my father made secret promises I've never heard of." "Then don't trust me," Elena said. "Just listen, that's all I'm asking." Dante studied her for a long moment, before finally nodding once, a small concession that seemed to cost him more than she realized. He crossed back to the desk, sat down across from her instead of behind it, an unspoken shift in the dynamic between them. "Tell me everything you know," he said, "every detail, no matter how small." Elena began to speak, choosing her words carefully, aware that every sentence could either build a bridge between them or burn it down entirely. She told him about finding the letter tucked inside an old ledger her father kept locked in his study, about the strange notations in the margins that hinted at names and dates long since forgotten by everyone except the 2 families involved. She told him about her father's final months, how he had grown quieter, more distant, as though carrying a weight he refused to share with anyone, including his own daughter. Dante listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable, though Elena noticed the subtle way his hands tightened on the arm of the chair whenever she mentioned certain details. When she finished, silence stretched between them again, heavier this time, filled with questions neither of them could yet answer. "My father never spoke about your family," Dante said eventually. "Not once, not in 20 years. "Maybe that was the point," Elena said. "Maybe silence was part of whatever agreement they made." Dante exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair, the gesture so unexpectedly human that it caught Elena off guard. For a brief moment, she saw not the feared boss the whole city whispered about, but a son still grieving a father he had lost far too young, still searching for answers that had been buried for 2 decades. "I need time to think," he said finally, "and I need to verify what you've told me." "I understand," Elena said, "but please, don't let your men do something reckless because you're afraid of what this letter might mean. Whatever debt exists between our families, it isn't something that gets solved with violence. If it were, I don't think either of our fathers would have gone to such lengths to keep it quiet. Dante studied her again, something shifting in his gaze, a flicker of respect he hadn't expected to feel toward the woman he had locked in this room only minutes ago. "You're not what I expected," he admitted. "Neither are you," Elena replied. The tension between them hadn't disappeared, not entirely, but it had transformed into something more complicated, something neither of them had a name for yet. Dante rose from his chair and walked to the door, but instead of unlocking it immediately, he paused with his hand on the mechanism. "You're staying close until I understand what this means," he said, "not as a prisoner, as someone I need answers from, and someone who might be in danger the moment word gets out that this letter exists." Elena's breath caught. "Danger from who?" "That," Dante said, finally turning the lock, "is exactly what I intend to find out." He opened the door, the noise of the club spilling back into the room, but the air between them remained charged with everything left unsaid. Elena rose from her chair, her legs unsteady beneath her, though she refused to let it show. As she stepped past him into the hallway, she felt his eyes following her, and she understood, without needing him to say it aloud, that whatever came next would change both of their lives, far beyond anything either of them could have predicted walking into this night. Behind them, on the desk, the letter remained open, its faded ink holding secrets that had waited 20 years to surface, secrets that were about to pull two families back into a reckoning neither had seen coming. A tall man with a shaved head and a scar along his jaw stepped forward as they entered the hallway. His name was Marco, and he served as Dante's closest guard, a man whose loyalty had been tested many times and had never once failed. His eyes moved from Dante to Elena and back again, questions written plainly across his face, even though he said nothing. "She stays close," Dante said simply. "Nobody touches her. Nobody speaks to her about club business. If anyone asks questions, you send them to me." Marco's eyebrows lifted slightly, a silent protest he wisely chose not to voice aloud. "Understood," he said instead, though his eyes lingered on Elena a moment longer, as if trying to work out what made her different from the countless others who had walked through these halls under far less careful watch. Elena felt the weight of that stare, felt the way the entire club seemed to shift its attention toward her the moment they stepped out of the office. Conversations paused, glasses stopped clinking. A woman near the bar leaned toward her companion and whispered something behind a cupped hand. Elena kept her eyes forward, refusing to let the attention rattle her further than the night already had. Dante led her down a narrow staircase toward a private exit at the rear of the building, away from the main floor where most of his guests never ventured. The night air outside was cool, carrying the distant sound of traffic and the occasional blare of a horn from the street beyond the alley. A black car waited at the curb, its engine already running, a driver standing beside the rear door with practiced patience. "Where are you taking me?" Elena asked, stopping just short of the car. "Somewhere safer than your apartment," Dante said. "If people learn you're the one who brought me that letter, your home will be the first place they look." "Safer according to who?" Elena pressed. "You locked me in a room 20 minutes ago and told me I belonged to you. Forgive me if your definition of safety doesn't inspire much confidence." For a moment, something almost like guilt passed across Dante's face, quickly smoothed away before it could fully form. "That was before I read the letter," he said. "Things are different now." "Are they?" Elena crossed her arms, refusing to move toward the open car door. "Or are you just changing tactics because you think it'll get you what you want faster?" Dante studied her for a long moment, the city lights casting shadows across the sharp angles of his face. "I don't expect you to trust me tonight," he said. "Maybe not for a long while, but whatever is written in that letter, it ties our families together in ways neither of us fully understands yet. Until I know exactly what that means, I'm not willing to let you walk back into a life where anyone could reach you." Elena hesitated, weighing his words against the instinct screaming at her to run in the opposite direction. But some part of her, the same part that had walked into his club knowing the risk, recognized the truth in what he said. There was no undoing what she had set into motion tonight. The only path left was forward. "Fine," she said finally, stepping toward the car. "But if I find out this is just another way of controlling me, I won't stay quiet about it." "Understood," Dante said, and for the first time that night, there was no command in his voice, only something that resembled respect. They rode in silence through streets that grew quieter and more residential the further they traveled from the club. Elena watched the city blur past the window, her mind racing through everything that had happened in the last hour, unable to settle on a single coherent thought. Beside her, Dante remained equally still, the letter now folded carefully inside his jacket, close to his chest, as if he feared letting it out of his sight even for a moment. Neither of them spoke again, until the car finally slowed in front of a large iron gate, beyond which stood a house far grander than anything Elena had expected. Whatever waited for her beyond those gates, she understood now that there was no turning back from the choice she had made tonight, and that the truth buried in her father's old ledger was only the beginning of a much longer story neither of them could yet fully see. The gate rolled open, and the car moved up a long gravel driveway, lined with tall trees that swayed gently in the night breeze. Elena pressed her palm against the cool glass of the window, watching the house grow larger as they approached, its stone walls lit by soft golden lights along the path. It looked less like the home of a man people feared, and more like a place built for quiet mornings and long dinners, a contradiction she filed away without comment. Inside, the house was just as unexpected: warm wood floors, tall bookshelves lined with worn spines, and a fireplace that looked well used rather than decorative. A housekeeper named Grace greeted them at the door, her expression polite, but curious, as her eyes moved between Dante and the stranger beside him. "Prepare the guest room upstairs," Dante said, "and bring tea to my study." Grace nodded and disappeared without a word, the kind of quiet efficiency that came from years of service in a household that valued discretion above almost everything else. Dante led Elena down a hallway lined with photographs, some faded with age, others more recent, though Elena noticed that very few included anyone smiling freely. She paused in front of one photograph in particular, an older man, with strong features and tired eyes, standing beside a younger version of Dante, who couldn't have been more than 15. "Your father?" she asked softly. Dante's jaw tightened. "Come," he said, not answering directly, though the answer was obvious enough. They entered his study, a room lined floor to ceiling with books, a large wooden desk positioned near the window, and two leather chairs facing each other near the fireplace. Dante gestured for her to sit, then pulled the letter from his jacket and laid it flat on the desk between them, smoothing the creases with careful fingers, as though the paper itself might crumble under too much pressure. "Read it with me," he said. "I want to understand every line, and I think you might notice details I miss." Elena leaned forward as Dante began to read aloud, his voice steady despite the emotion clearly building beneath the surface. The letter was addressed simply to his father's closest friend, a name Elena recognized instantly as her own father's, written in a tone that mixed formality with something far more personal underneath. The letter described a night 22 years earlier, when Dante's father had been cornered by members of a rival organization seeking to take over territory long controlled by the Russo family. According to the letter, Elena's father, a quiet accountant with no obvious ties to that world, had uncovered evidence of corruption within the rival group, evidence that could have destroyed them entirely if made public. Instead of using it for his own gain, he had offered it to Dante's father in exchange for one promise: that the Marino family would remain forever separated from that dangerous world, protected, untouched, allowed to live an ordinary life, free from the violence that came with power, like the Russo family held. "He saved my father's life," Dante said quietly, more to himself than to Elena. "And in exchange, my father promised to keep your family out of everything. That's why I never knew your name. That's why there was never any connection between us." Elena felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, though she blinked them back before they could fall. "My father never told me any of this," she said. "He let me believe our family was simply ordinary, that we had no connection to any of this at all." "Maybe that was the point," Dante said. "Maybe he wanted you to have exactly that, an ordinary life." The letter continued, detailing an arrangement that had been renewed quietly over the years, small favors exchanged discreetly, always through indirect channels, always designed to keep both families safe from the kind of exposure that could bring danger to either side. But near the final paragraph, the tone shifted. Dante's father had written about a growing threat, a name Elena didn't recognize, someone within the rival organization who had never accepted the old agreement and had spent years searching for a way to expose it. "Do you know this name?" Elena asked, pointing to the signature at the bottom of a particular paragraph. Dante's face darkened. "Everyone in this life knows that name," he said. "Or at least, everyone used to. He disappeared years ago. Most people assumed he was dead." "But you don't think he is," Elena said, reading the tension in Dante's expression. "I think," Dante said slowly, "that if this letter exists, and if you're the one who found it, then whoever is hunting for the truth behind this old debt hasn't given up. And now that you've walked into my club and handed this to me directly, there's a very real chance that person, or whoever inherited his ambitions, will come looking for both of us." Elena sat back in her chair, the full weight of the night finally settling over her. She had walked into Dante's club hoping to close one chapter of her family's hidden history, only to discover she had opened a door into something far larger and far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. "What happens now?" she asked. Dante folded the letter carefully and placed it inside a drawer, locking it with a small brass key he wore on a chain beneath his shirt. "Now," he said, "we find out exactly who else knows about this arrangement, and we make sure that whoever comes looking for it finds nothing but a dead end." "And if they don't find a dead end?" Elena pressed. Dante met her eyes, and for a brief moment, the careful control he usually wore like armor slipped just enough to reveal something more vulnerable underneath. "Then I protect you," he said simply, "whatever that requires." The certainty in his voice startled her, not because it sounded like a promise made out of obligation, but because it sounded, oddly, like a promise he genuinely intended to keep. Elena wasn't sure what to make of that shift, wasn't sure how a man who had locked her in a room only hours earlier could now sound so committed to her safety, but something about the sincerity in his tone made her want to believe him. Grace returned with a tray of tea, setting it quietly on the table between them before retreating without a word. Elena wrapped her hands around the warm cup, grateful for something steady to hold on to, after a night that had unraveled everything she thought she understood about her family's past. "Tell me about your father," she said after a long silence. "The real him. Not the version people in your world talk about." Dante seemed surprised by the question, as though no one had asked him something so simple in a very long time. He hesitated, staring into the fire crackling softly in the hearth, before finally speaking. "He used to take me fishing every summer," Dante said. "Just the two of us, before dawn, before anyone else in the house woke up. He never talked about business during those mornings. He'd tell me stories about his own childhood instead, about mistakes he made, about the kind of man he wanted me to become." Dante's voice softened, the hardness in his expression fading into something more distant and reflective. "After he died, I stopped fishing. I told myself I didn't have time for it anymore. But the truth is, I think I was afraid of remembering him too clearly. It made the loss worse." Elena listened quietly, recognizing in his words the same grief she still carried for her own father, buried beneath busy days and forced routines designed to keep the pain at a manageable distance. "My father used to read to me every night before bed," she offered. "Even when I was too old for it, even when I pretended to be annoyed by it. I think now he just wanted an excuse to sit with me a little longer." Dante's eyes softened as he looked at her, something unspoken passing between them, a shared understanding that transcended the strange and dangerous circumstances that had brought them together. For a moment, the tension in the room eased, replaced by something quieter, more fragile, a connection neither of them had expected to find in the middle of a night that had begun with threats and locked doors. "We should rest," Dante said eventually, breaking the silence. "Tomorrow, I need to speak with people I trust and find out exactly how much danger this letter has put us both in." Elena nodded, though sleep felt impossibly far away given everything racing through her mind. As she rose to follow Grace toward the guest room upstairs, she paused at the study door and turned back to face him. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not treating me like a threat, once you understood the truth." Dante's expression flickered with something unreadable. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "We don't know what's coming for us. Not yet." His words lingered in her mind, long after she closed the door to the guest room behind her, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her chest as she finally allowed herself to sit on the edge of the unfamiliar bed and process everything the night had revealed. Somewhere beyond these walls, a truth 20 years buried was beginning to stir, and Elena understood, with a certainty that chilled her, that neither she nor Dante would be able to control how far its reach might extend before this was over. Downstairs, Dante remained in his study long after Elena had gone, staring into the dying embers of the fire, his father's letter locked safely away, though the words themselves refused to leave his thoughts. He thought of the name mentioned near the letter's end, a man the underworld had long believed dead, and felt a cold certainty settle over him that whatever peace his father had bought decades ago was about to be tested in ways neither family could have anticipated. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in months, a contact reserved only for matters requiring absolute discretion. When the call connected, his voice was low, controlled, betraying none of the unease coiling tighter inside his chest. "I need everything you can find," he said, "on a man named Callum Doyle. Quietly, and I need it by morning." The voice on the other end hesitated before responding, clearly recognizing the weight behind the request. "That name hasn't surfaced in years," the contact said. "Are you certain?" Dante's gaze drifted toward the locked drawer holding his father's letter. "I'm certain," he said, "and if he's still alive, I need to know before he finds out we know he exists." He ended the call and sat back in his chair, the fire finally burning down to nothing but glowing embers, the silence of the house settling heavily around him. Whatever came next, he understood that the quiet, careful life he had built to keep his family's darker history buried was no longer guaranteed, and that the woman sleeping upstairs, whether she realized it fully or not, had become inseparably tied to whatever storm was building on the horizon. Morning arrived with pale light filtering through the curtains of the guest room, and Elena woke to the unfamiliar sound of birds outside, rather than the traffic she was used to hearing from her apartment window. For a moment, she forgot where she was, until the events of the previous night came rushing back all at once, pulling her upright with a jolt. She found Dante already in the kitchen when she came downstairs, dressed and alert despite what must have been very little sleep. A cup of coffee sat untouched in front of him, his attention fixed instead on a folder spread open across the table. He looked up when she entered, his expression unreadable, though the tightness around his eyes suggested the night had brought him little peace. "You should eat something," he said, gesturing toward a plate of fruit and bread that Grace had apparently prepared before disappearing again. "We have a lot to discuss." Elena sat across from him, eyeing the folder with cautious curiosity. "You found something." "I found confirmation of something I hoped wasn't true," Dante said, sliding the folder toward her. Inside were printed photographs, grainy and clearly taken from a distance, showing a man with graying hair and sharp features standing outside a shipping warehouse near the docks. "This is Callum Doyle, the man mentioned in my father's letter. Everyone in my world believed he died years ago in a territory dispute. Apparently, that belief was wrong." Elena studied the photograph closely, though the man meant nothing to her personally. "What does this mean for us?" "It means the threat my father tried to neutralize 20 years ago never actually disappeared," Dante said. "It just went quiet, and if he's resurfaced now, so soon after your father's death, I don't think that's a coincidence." A cold unease settled over Elena as the implications sank in. "You think my father's death wasn't natural?" Dante hesitated before answering, clearly weighing how much to reveal. "I think it's possible," he said carefully. "I'm not saying it's certain. But given the timing, given the fact that the letter surfaced now, I can't rule it out." Elena's hands tightened around the edge of the table, grief and anger tangling together inside her chest. She had spent months believing her father's death was simply the result of age and a weak heart, a quiet ending to a quiet life. The possibility that it might have been something else entirely, that it might be connected to secrets he had carried for over 2 decades, felt like the ground shifting beneath her feet all over again. "I need to know for certain," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I can't just accept a maybe." "I understand," Dante said, "and I intend to find out. But that means moving carefully. If Doyle is alive and active again, drawing attention to ourselves too quickly could put us both at greater risk." Before Elena could respond, footsteps echoed from the hallway, and a man entered the kitchen with the easy confidence of someone who belonged in the house, though his eyes sharpened with suspicion the moment they landed on Elena. This was Victor, the man Marco had mentioned briefly the night before, Dante's second-in-command and closest advisor within the organization. "You're keeping her here," Victor said, not bothering to disguise the disapproval in his voice. "In your home. After locking her in your office last night like she was a threat to be contained." "Things have changed since last night," Dante said evenly, though there was a warning beneath the calm tone that Victor seemed to recognize immediately. "Clearly," Victor said, glancing at the folder still open on the table. "And you're telling me Callum Doyle is somehow connected to all this?" "He is," Dante said, "according to a letter my father wrote before his death, one that directly involves Elena's family." Victor's jaw tightened, his gaze flicking toward Elena with renewed scrutiny. "You understand how dangerous this is," he said. "If Doyle finds out this woman is the one who brought that letter to light, she becomes a target. And if she's staying under this roof, so does everyone connected to this house." "I'm aware of the risk," Dante said, his tone leaving no room for further argument. "That's exactly why she's staying close, where I can protect her, rather than out there alone where anyone could reach her." Victor studied his boss for a long moment, clearly biting back further objections, though the tension in his shoulders made his disagreement plain enough without words. "I'll increase security around the property," he said finally, "and I'll start quietly reaching out to contacts who might know more about Doyle's recent movements." "Do it discreetly," Dante said. "The last thing we need is word spreading that we're actively looking into him. If he realizes we know he's alive, he'll disappear again before we can learn anything useful." Victor nodded once, though his gaze lingered on Elena a moment longer, before he turned and left the kitchen, his footsteps fading down the hallway. Elena exhaled slowly, only now realizing how tense her body had become during the exchange. "He doesn't trust me," she said. "Victor doesn't trust anyone outside a very small circle," Dante said. "It's part of what makes him good at his job. Give him time." Elena wasn't entirely convinced that time alone would soften Victor's suspicion, but she said nothing further, choosing instead to focus on the more pressing concern hanging over both of them. "What do we do next?" she asked. "We need more information," Dante said. "About Doyle's current operations, about who he's working with, and about whether he's already aware that the letter exists. I have people who can help with that, carefully and quietly. In the meantime, I don't want you going anywhere without someone I trust nearby." "I have a life, Dante," Elena said, though her protest lacked its earlier sharpness. "A job, responsibilities. I can't simply disappear into hiding indefinitely." "I'm not asking you to disappear," Dante said. "I'm asking you to be careful, and to let me help keep you safe while we figure out exactly what we're dealing with. That's all." Elena studied him for a long moment, searching for any sign of manipulation behind his words, but found only sincerity, tempered by the same exhaustion and uncertainty she felt herself. Slowly, she nodded, accepting the fragile truce they seemed to be building between them, even as the shadow of Callum Doyle loomed somewhere beyond the walls of the house, a threat neither of them could yet fully measure. Over the following hours, the household shifted into a quiet, focused rhythm. Marco returned with updates on increased security measures along the property's perimeter. Grace moved through the house with practiced calm, though even she seemed to sense the tension simmering beneath the surface of every conversation. Elena spent much of the afternoon in the study, poring over her father's old ledger alongside Dante, searching for any additional clues that might shed light on the arrangement between their families. "Here," Elena said finally, pointing to a faint notation near the back of the ledger, half hidden beneath years of faded ink. "This date. It matches the date mentioned in your father's letter." Dante leaned closer, studying the notation carefully. "What does it reference?" "A shipment," Elena said slowly, piecing together the fragmented notes. "I think my father tracked something related to Doyle's old operation, something beyond just exposing corruption. Maybe evidence that never made it into official reports." Dante's expression sharpened with sudden interest. "If that evidence still exists somewhere, it could be exactly what we need to make sure Doyle never resurfaces as a threat again. Or it could be exactly what gets us both killed if we go looking for it." Elena countered. The weight of that possibility settled heavily between them, neither willing to dismiss the danger, nor able to ignore the potential the discovery represented. Outside, the afternoon light began to shift toward evening, casting long shadows across the study floor, and somewhere beyond the safety of Dante's estate, the man both families had once believed dead, continued moving through the shadows of a world neither Elena nor Dante fully understood yet, but were both now irrevocably bound to face together. 3 days passed before Elena felt anything close to settled inside the walls of Dante's estate, and even then, settled was too generous a word for the constant undercurrent of watchfulness that shaped every hour. She had grown used to Marco's quiet presence near the doors, to Grace's gentle knock each morning with breakfast, to the low hum of tension that never fully left the house no matter how ordinary the days tried to appear on the surface. She had not grown used to Victor. He watched her the way a man watches a stranger left alone with something valuable, never openly hostile, but never warm either. She caught him more than once speaking quietly with Dante, in hushed tones that stopped abruptly whenever she entered a room, and though she understood the caution given everything at stake, the constant suspicion wore at her patience more than she wanted to admit. "You don't have to like me," she told him one afternoon, finding him alone in the hallway outside the study, sorting through a stack of papers with sharp, efficient movements. "But I'd appreciate it if you stopped talking about me like I can't hear you." Victor looked up, mild surprise flickering across his face before settling back into practiced neutrality. "I don't dislike you," he said. "I distrust circumstances. There's a difference." "Explain it to me then," Elena said, crossing her arms. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks a lot like you think I'm a liability Dante hasn't figured out how to handle yet." Victor set the papers down, studying her with an intensity that reminded her uncomfortably of Dante during their first encounter. "You walked into our world less than a week ago carrying a letter that could unravel decades of careful arrangements," he said. "You've upended security protocols we've maintained for years, and now Dante is spending resources protecting you instead of focusing on threats we already understood. Forgive me if that makes me cautious." "I didn't ask to be protected," Elena said. "I came here to give Dante the truth, because I believed it was the right thing to do, even knowing the risk to myself. If anything, I'd think that counts for something." Victor was quiet for a long moment, something shifting behind his guarded expression. "Maybe it does," he admitted finally, though his tone remained measured. "But good intentions don't stop bullets, Elena. And in this world, good intentions get people killed more often than they save them." His words settled uncomfortably in her chest, a reminder of exactly how much danger still hovered at the edges of the careful peace they had built inside these walls. She said nothing further, watching as Victor gathered his papers and walked away, leaving her alone with the quiet weight of his warning. That evening, Dante found her in the garden behind the house, sitting on a stone bench beneath an old oak tree, watching the last light of the day fade behind the distant hills. He approached slowly, giving her space, though he settled onto the bench beside her, without asking permission. Something she noticed had become more common between them over the past few days. "Victor spoke with you," he said. "It wasn't a question." "He's not wrong to be cautious," Elena said. "I understand why he doesn't trust me. I would probably feel the same in his position." "He's protective," Dante said. "It's part of what makes him valuable. But he doesn't get to decide who I choose to trust." Elena glanced at him, surprised by the certainty in his voice. "You trust me then? Fully?" Dante considered the question longer than she expected, his gaze fixed on the darkening horizon. "I trust that you brought me that letter because you believed it was right, not because you wanted something from me," he said finally. "That's more than I can say about most people who walk into my life." The admission settled between them, quiet and unguarded, a rare moment of honesty in a week, defined by suspicion and calculated caution. Elena found herself studying his profile in the fading light, noticing details she hadn't allowed herself to notice before, the tension he carried in his shoulders, the way his expression softened only slightly when he thought no one was watching closely. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Go ahead." "Do you ever regret the life you inherited, the world your father built for you?" Dante was quiet for a long moment before answering, his jaw tightening slightly. "Every day," he admitted. "But regret doesn't change what I am, or what responsibilities came with my father's name. I learned a long time ago that wishing for a different life doesn't make the one you have disappear. That sounds lonely, Elena said softly. It is, Dante said, meeting her eyes directly for the first time since he had sat down, lonelier than I usually let myself admit. Something passed between them in that moment, fragile and unspoken, a recognition of shared isolation that neither of them had expected to find in the other. Elena felt her chest tighten, unsure whether the feeling building inside her was fear, sympathy, or something far more complicated that she wasn't ready to name. Before either of them could speak further, Marco appeared at the edge of the garden, his expression tense enough to pull both of them immediately back into the reality surrounding them. We have movement, he said. 2 unfamiliar vehicles circled the perimeter twice in the last hour. I think we've been found. Dante rose immediately, all traces of the quiet vulnerability from moments earlier vanishing behind the composed authority Elena had first encountered in his office days ago. Get Elena inside, he said. Increase watch on every entrance. I want eyes on those vehicles the moment they return. Elena's pulse spiked as she followed Marco toward the house, glancing back once to see Dante already speaking rapidly into his phone, his expression hard and focused. The fragile peace of the evening had shattered in an instant, replaced by the sharp, immediate reality of the danger that had been circling them since the moment she walked into his club with her father's letter. Inside, Grace ushered her toward the study, drawing the heavy curtains shut with practiced efficiency, though her hands trembled slightly as she worked. This has happened before, Grace admitted quietly, noticing Elena's alarm. Not often, but Mr. Russo's world sometimes brings unwelcome visitors. Try not to worry too much. He knows how to handle these situations. Elena appreciated the attempt at reassurance, though it did little to calm the anxious pounding of her heart. She sat in the study, listening to muffled voices and hurried footsteps moving through the house, feeling entirely helpless in a situation she had unknowingly set into motion the moment she decided to walk into Dante's club. Nearly an hour passed before Dante finally returned, his expression grim but controlled. The vehicles left the area, he said. No confirmed contact, no attempt to breach the property. But it wasn't random. Someone was watching this house. Doyle, Elena said quietly. Possibly, Dante said. Or someone working for him. Either way, it confirms what we suspected. Word is spreading that the letter exists, and someone wants to know exactly what we know. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, the chill of fear settling deep despite the warmth of the study around her. What do we do now? Dante crossed the room and knelt in front of her chair, an unusual gesture of closeness that startled her slightly, given the formal distance he had maintained for most of their time together. We stay ahead of them, he said, his voice steady, despite the tension still evident in his posture. We find out everything we can about Doyle's operation before he finds a way to reach either of us directly. And I promise you, Elena, whatever happens, I won't let him get close enough to hurt you. The certainty in his voice, paired with the rare vulnerability in his eyes, settled something inside her, that fear had been steadily unraveling since the moment Marco's warning interrupted their conversation in the garden. She nodded slowly, drawing strength from his resolve even as uncertainty continued to churn beneath the surface of her composure. Over the following days, the household shifted into a heightened state of alert. Marco expanded security measures across the property, additional guards stationed discreetly along the perimeter, cameras adjusted to cover every possible approach. Victor threw himself into gathering information, his earlier suspicion of Elena tempered slightly by the shared urgency of the growing threat, though his guarded caution never fully disappeared. Elena found herself drawn increasingly into the investigation itself, her familiarity with her father's old records proving invaluable as they pieced together fragments of the arrangement between their families. Late into several evenings, she and Dante worked side by side in the study, cross-referencing dates, names, and locations, slowly building a clearer picture of the shadowy history that had led them to this moment. It was during one such evening, well past midnight, that Elena finally allowed herself to voice the question that had been building inside her for days. Dante, she said quietly, setting down the papers she had been studying, why does this matter so much to you? Beyond protecting the family name, beyond honoring your father's memory, what is it you actually want out of all this? Dante looked up from his own work, considering the question with unusual care. "I want to understand who my father truly was," he said finally. "Not the version people whisper about in this world, and not the distant memory I've clung to since he died. I want to understand the man who made a promise to protect your family, even at great personal risk, because it was the right thing to do. I think if I can understand that part of him, maybe I can find a way to be a better version of the man he raised me to become." Elena felt something shift inside her chest at the raw honesty in his words, an unexpected tenderness breaking through the careful walls both of them had built around themselves since this dangerous journey began. "I think you're already becoming that man," she said softly, "whether you realize it or not." Dante's eyes met hers, something unspoken passing between them in the quiet stillness of the study, the weight of the danger surrounding them momentarily forgotten in favor of a connection neither of them had anticipated finding amid so much uncertainty. Neither moved to close the distance between them, though the air between them felt charged with a tension entirely different from the fear that had defined most of their days together. "We should rest," Dante said eventually, breaking the moment with visible reluctance. "Tomorrow, Victor believes he may have located someone who worked closely with Doyle before his disappearance. If we can find them, we might finally get the answers we need." Elena nodded, though the warmth lingering from their conversation stayed with her long after she retired to the guest room that night. A quiet reminder that amid all the danger and uncertainty surrounding them, something genuine and unexpected had begun to grow between them, fragile, but undeniable, even as the shadow of Callum Doyle continued to loom over every step forward they managed to take. The following morning brought news that shifted the investigation's momentum entirely. Victor arrived early, his expression carrying a rare edge of urgency as he laid a folder on the study table. "Her name is Nina Foley," he said. "She worked as a bookkeeper for Doyle's operation more than 15 years ago, before everything fell apart. She's been living quietly under a different name ever since, but my contacts confirmed her location yesterday." "Will she talk to us?" Dante asked. "That depends entirely on how carefully we approach her," Victor said. "People who walked away from that world usually did so because they were terrified of exactly the kind of attention we're about to bring back into their lives." Elena studied the folder, a grainy photograph of a woman with tired eyes and graying hair staring back at her. "I should go with you," she said. "If she's frightened, maybe hearing this from someone outside your world, someone who isn't associated with threats or power, will make her more willing to open up." Dante hesitated, clearly weighing the risk against the potential value of Elena's suggestion. "It's dangerous," he said. "If anyone is watching Nina's movements, tracking us to her location could expose us both." "I understand the risk," Elena said firmly. "But I also understand that I might be able to reach her in a way you and Victor can't. Let me try." After a long moment, Dante nodded, though the reluctance in his expression made clear how much the decision cost him. "We move carefully," he said, "and if anything feels wrong, we leave immediately. No hesitation." Elena agreed. Gratitude and nervous anticipation tangled together as the household shifted into preparation for what could be the breakthrough they desperately needed, or the first step toward a danger far greater than anything they had yet encountered in this unraveling story that had begun with nothing more than a single sealed letter and a locked office door. They traveled separately to the small coastal town where Nina Foley had built her quiet new life, Dante insisting on taking a longer route to avoid any possibility of being followed. Elena spent the drive staring out the window at passing fields and small towns, her mind cycling through everything she might say to a woman who had spent 15 years running from the very world Elena had recently been pulled into. The house, when they finally arrived, was modest and well kept, surrounded by a small garden bursting with late-season flowers. Dante parked a block away, insisting Elena approach alone at first, with Marco stationed nearby out of sight in case anything went wrong. Elena walked up the short path and knocked gently on the door, her heart pounding with an anxiety she tried hard to keep from showing on her face. The woman who answered looked older than her photograph, though her eyes carried the same guarded wariness Elena had noticed, even in the grainy image Victor had provided. "Can I help you?" Nina asked, her hand still resting on the edge of the door, ready to close it at the first sign of trouble. "My name is Elena Marino," Elena said carefully. I'm not here to cause you any harm. I need to ask you about something that happened a long time ago. Something involving a man named Callum Doyle. Nina's face went pale, and for a moment, Elena feared she would slam the door shut without another word. Instead, after a long, tense silence, Nina stepped back and gestured for her to come inside. You'd better explain quickly, she said, and you'd better not be lying about why you're here. Elena stepped into a small, tidy living room, sitting carefully on the edge of a worn couch, while Nina remained standing near the window, watching the street outside with obvious unease. I found a letter, Elena began, written by a man named Alessandro Russo, more than 20 years ago. It mentions an arrangement between his family and mine, something connected to evidence my father once gathered against Doyle's operation. Nina's hands tightened around the curtain she had been holding aside. Your father was the accountant, she said quietly, more statement than question. I remember hearing about him. Doyle never forgave whoever exposed those records, though he never learned exactly who was responsible. If he finds out now, after all these years... That's exactly why I'm here, Elena said, because I think Doyle might already know, or is close to finding out. And I need to understand exactly what my father uncovered, so we can figure out how to protect ourselves before it's too late. Nina turned from the window, studying Elena with an expression caught somewhere between fear and reluctant sympathy. You don't understand what you're asking, she said. Doyle wasn't just running smuggling operations back then. He was moving something far more dangerous, something connected to people with far more power than anyone in his own organization. Your father's evidence didn't just threaten Doyle. It threatened people above him, people who would have destroyed anyone connected to that information without hesitation. Elena felt a chill settle over her. What kind of evidence? Nina hesitated, glancing nervously toward the window once more before finally speaking. Financial records, she said quietly. Proof that certain city officials were accepting payments to look away from Doyle's shipments. Names, dates, bank routes. If that information had gone public back then, it would have ended careers, maybe even led to serious charges against people who are still powerful today. The weight of that revelation settled heavily over Elena, far beyond anything she had anticipated when she first found her father's ledger. Do you know where that evidence might be now? She asked. If it still exists, it might be the only way to stop Doyle before he comes after either of our families. Nina shook her head slowly. I don't know for certain, but I remember your father kept meticulous records of everything he ever handled. If he hid something away, it wouldn't have been somewhere obvious. He was too careful for that. Elena's mind raced through possibilities, retracing memories of her father's quiet habits, his careful organization, the locked drawers in his study she had never thought to question while he was alive. Thank you, she said finally, rising from the couch. This helps more than you know. Be careful, Nina said, her voice suddenly urgent. If Doyle even suspects that evidence still exists, he won't hesitate to eliminate anyone standing between him and its destruction. That includes you. Elena nodded, gratitude and renewed fear tangled together as she made her way back outside toward the car where Dante waited. She relayed everything Nina had told her, watching his expression darken with each new detail. City officials, Dante said slowly. That changes everything. If Doyle has connections that reach that high, this isn't just about protecting our families anymore. This is about protecting anyone who might get caught in the crossfire if that information surfaces publicly. Or if it doesn't, Elena said. If Doyle destroys it first, and destroys anyone who might know where it's hidden. The drive back to the estate passed largely in silence, both of them absorbing the weight of what they had learned, the scope of the danger surrounding them expanding far beyond what either had anticipated when this journey began. By the time they arrived home, the sun had already begun sinking toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the property that seemed to mirror the uncertainty settling over both of their futures. Victor met them at the door, his expression tightening the moment he saw the grim set of Dante's jaw. What did you find? He asked. Dante relayed the details of their conversation with Nina, watching as Victor's expression shifted from concern to something closer to alarm. If city officials were involved, Victor said, then Doyle's reach extends far beyond anything we accounted for in our security planning. We need to reconsider everything. Agreed, Dante said. starting with finding whatever evidence Elena's father hid before Doyle's people find it first. That evening, Elena returned to her father's ledger with renewed determination, searching every margin, every faded notation, for any hint of where he might have concealed something so dangerous for so many years. Dante worked alongside her long into the night, both of them fueled by growing urgency rather than exhaustion, though the toll of the past week was visible in the tired lines etched around both their eyes. "Here," Elena said finally, well past midnight, pointing to a small notation tucked into the back pages of the ledger, easy to overlook unless someone knew exactly what they were searching for. "A storage unit. My father never mentioned owning one, but this reference matches a payment record from years ago." Dante leaned closer, studying the faint writing. "It's worth investigating," he said, carefully, and soon, before anyone else has the chance to find it first. Elena felt a flicker of hope cut through the exhaustion weighing on her, the first tangible lead that might finally allow them to move from simply reacting to Doyle's shadow and toward actively protecting themselves against whatever he intended next. She looked up at Dante, finding him already watching her with an expression that mixed determination and something gentler, something that had been quietly building between them throughout the tense, uncertain days they had spent working side by side. "We'll find it," Dante said softly, as much a promise to himself as to her. "And when we do, we'll make sure Doyle never has the chance to use fear against either of our families again." Elena nodded, drawing strength from his certainty, even as the unknown risks ahead continued pressing at the edges of her thoughts. Outside, the estate settled into a rare, uneasy stillness, the security lights along the perimeter glowing steadily against the darkness, a fragile boundary between the careful peace they had built inside these walls and the storm they both understood was rapidly gathering just beyond them. The storage facility sat on the edge of the city, a row of gray metal doors lined along a quiet street that saw little traffic even during the busiest hours of the day. Dante insisted on arriving before sunrise, when the chance of being noticed remained lowest, and Elena found herself standing beside him in the cool morning air, watching Marco check the surrounding street for any sign that they had been followed. "This is it," Elena said, comparing the unit number against the faded notation in her father's ledger. Her hands trembled slightly as she inserted the old key she had found tucked inside the same drawer where the letter had been hidden, half expecting the lock to refuse to turn after so many years of neglect. It gave way with a rusty groan, and the metal door rolled upward to reveal a small, dust-covered space containing little more than a single metal filing cabinet and a stack of cardboard boxes. Elena felt her breath catch as she stepped inside, the weight of finally standing in a space her father had kept secret for over 2 decades settling heavily over her. "Careful," Dante said, following close behind her, his eyes scanning the small space with practiced caution. "We don't know what condition anything is in, or whether anyone else has already been here." The filing cabinet was locked, but the same key that had opened the storage unit fit its drawers as well. Inside, Elena found neatly organized folders, her father's precise handwriting, labeling each one with dates and reference numbers that meant nothing to her at first glance, but clearly meant a great deal to whoever had once needed to hide them. "This is everything," Dante said quietly, flipping through the contents of one folder, his expression darkening as he studied the documents inside. Bank statements, wire transfers, names of officials I recognize even now, though most of them have moved into more prominent positions since these records were made. Elena's hands shook as she examined another folder, photographs of shipping manifests, handwritten notes cross-referencing dates and locations with damning precision. Her father, the quiet, unassuming man she had known only as gentle and careful, had spent months, maybe years, secretly documenting corruption dangerous enough to destroy powerful people, all while maintaining the appearance of an ordinary, unremarkable life. Why would he keep all of this instead of destroying it? Elena asked softly. If it was dangerous enough to threaten his own safety, why not simply let it disappear? "Insurance," Dante said grimly. "As long as this evidence existed, Doyle and anyone connected to him had a reason to leave your father alone. Destroying it would have removed any protection that agreement provided." The realization settled heavily over Elena, understanding at last the delicate, Dangerous balance her father had maintained for the entirety of her life, without her ever suspecting a single detail of it. "We need to get this somewhere safe," she said. "Immediately." Dante nodded, already reaching for his phone to call Marco forward to help transport the boxes. But before he could finish dialing, the low rumble of an approaching vehicle echoed from the street outside, growing louder with alarming speed. Marco appeared in the doorway of the unit, his expression sharp with sudden urgency. "We have company," he said. "2 cars, moving fast, and they're not slowing down." Dante's expression hardened instantly, years of instinct taking over, as he moved swiftly to secure the folders back into a single box. "Elena, stay close to me. Marco, get the car ready to move the moment we're outside." Elena's pulse pounded as she helped gather the remaining documents, her hands fumbling slightly with the urgency of the moment. Through the narrow gap of the storage unit door, she caught sight of 2 dark vehicles pulling to an abrupt stop at the end of the row, doors opening rapidly as several men emerged, their movements coordinated in a way that left no doubt about their intentions. "They found us," Elena breathed. "Move," Dante said firmly, guiding her toward the rear of the storage unit, where Marco had already located a narrow service door leading to a connecting alley behind the building. "We can't risk a confrontation here, not with civilians nearby, and evidence we still need to protect." They slipped through the narrow door just as raised voices echoed from the front of the unit, someone clearly discovering the empty space and the tampered lock. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs as they hurried down the alley, Dante's hand firm against her back, guiding her forward with a protective urgency that left no room for hesitation. Marco met them at the end of the alley with the car already running, and within moments they were speeding away from the storage facility, weaving through quiet residential streets to put as much distance as possible between themselves and whoever had arrived so suddenly at the unit. Elena clutched the box of documents against her chest, her breathing still ragged from the abrupt sprint, adrenaline coursing through her system in a way that made the entire morning feel disorienting and unreal. "How did they find us?" she asked, once they had merged onto a busier road, the immediate danger finally beginning to recede behind them. Dante's jaw tightened, his eyes flicking toward the rearview mirror repeatedly, checking for any sign of pursuit. "I don't know," he admitted. "We were careful, unless someone within my own organization provided information about our movements." The implication hung heavily in the car, an unspoken suspicion neither of them wanted to voice directly, though Elena could see the wheels turning behind Dante's guarded expression, already cycling through the small circle of people who had known about their plans to visit the storage facility that morning. They arrived back at the estate within the hour, the household immediately shifting into heightened alert once again as Marco relayed details of the pursuit to the additional security personnel stationed around the property. Victor met them in the entryway, his expression carrying a mixture of relief and sharp concern as he took in the box of documents Elena still carried protectively against her chest. "You found something," he said. "Enough to confirm exactly how dangerous this situation has become," Dante said. "And enough to explain why someone tried to intercept us before we could secure it." Victor's eyes narrowed with sudden focus. "You think we have a leak?" "I think it's a possibility we can no longer afford to ignore," Dante said, his voice low and controlled despite the clear tension simmering beneath the surface. "Very few people knew about this morning's plans. I need you to quietly review everyone who had access to that information." Victor's expression tightened further, though he nodded without argument, understanding immediately the gravity of what Dante was asking him to investigate. Elena watched the exchange with growing unease, recognizing that the danger surrounding them had shifted from an external threat into something potentially far closer and more personal, a betrayal that could unravel the fragile trust holding their fractured alliance together. That evening, as the household settled into a tense, watchful quiet, Elena found herself standing at the window of the guest room, staring out over the darkened grounds where security lights cast long, shifting shadows across the lawn. The documents her father had risked everything to protect now sat locked away in Dante's study, evidence powerful enough to end the careers of dangerous men, but also powerful enough, she now understood clearly, to end lives if it fell into the wrong hands before they could decide how best to use it. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts, and she turned to find Dante standing in the doorway, his expression carrying the same weary tension that had settled over both of them since the encounter at the storage facility. "I wanted to check on you," he said. "Today was frightening, I know that." "I'm still standing," Elena said, though her voice carried less certainty than she intended. "That's something, I suppose." Dante stepped further into the room, closing the distance between them with careful, deliberate steps. "I meant what I said before," he told her quietly. "I won't let anything happen to you. Whatever it takes, whoever within my own circle I need to confront, I will protect you through this." Elena studied him in the dim light of the room, searching for any trace of doubt behind his words, and finding none. "I believe you," she said softly, and found, to her own surprise, that she genuinely meant it. The air between them thickened with unspoken tension, the events of the day stripping away much of the careful distance they had maintained since the very beginning of this dangerous journey. Neither moved for a long moment, caught in the quiet gravity pulling them closer together despite every reason circumstance had given them to remain guarded. "We should focus on what comes next," Dante said finally, though his voice carried a reluctance that suggested he wanted nothing less than to step back from the moment building between them. "Doyle knows we have something now, he'll move quickly, and we need to be ready for whatever he decides to do." Elena nodded, though the warmth of his presence lingered even after he stepped back and excused himself for the night, leaving her alone once more with her thoughts, and the growing certainty that the danger surrounding them was about to escalate far beyond anything they had yet faced together. 2 days later, Victor requested a private meeting with Dante, his expression grim as he closed the study door behind him, ensuring their conversation would remain entirely between the two of them. Elena, working quietly in the adjoining room, could hear only fragments of raised voices through the heavy door, enough to sense that whatever Victor had discovered carried weight far beyond a routine security update. When Dante finally emerged, his face had drained of color, replaced by a controlled fury that Elena had not seen from him since the very first night in his office. He found her in the hallway and gestured silently for her to follow him back into the study, where Victor stood near the fireplace, his expression carrying an unusual heaviness. "Tell her what you told me," Dante said, his voice tight with barely restrained anger. Victor hesitated, clearly reluctant, before finally speaking. "I traced the leak," he said. "The information about our visit to the storage facility. It came from inside this house." Elena's stomach dropped. "Who?" "Grace," Victor said quietly. "She's been passing information to an outside contact for weeks. I don't yet know the full extent of what she's shared, but the timing matches exactly with the ambush at the storage facility." Elena thought of the gentle housekeeper who had greeted her with quiet kindness since her very first night in this house, who had brought tea and prepared meals, and never once shown anything but careful courtesy. The betrayal felt disorienting, a crack running through the fragile sense of safety she had begun building within these walls. "Why would she do this?" Elena asked. "We don't know yet," Dante said. "Victor is confirming details now, but whatever her reasons, we can no longer trust the security of this house the way we did even yesterday." Before Victor could respond further, the sound of a door slamming somewhere deeper in the house cut through the tense conversation, followed immediately by raised voices and the unmistakable sound of a struggle. Dante's expression sharpened instantly, years of instinct propelling him toward the door before either Elena or Victor could react. "Stay here," he ordered, though Elena had no intention of remaining behind while chaos erupted somewhere within the walls meant to keep her safe. She followed close behind despite his instruction, moving quickly through the hallway toward the source of the commotion. What she found stopped her cold. Grace stood near the kitchen entrance, her expression frantic, a phone clutched in her trembling hand, while 2 unfamiliar men stood near the back door, having clearly forced their way inside through an entrance that should have been secured. "I didn't have a choice," Grace said, her voice breaking as Dante's eyes moved between her and the intruders with barely controlled fury. "They threatened my son. I've been feeding them small details for weeks, nothing that mattered, I swear, until they demanded to know about the storage facility." "You put Elena's life at risk," Dante said, his voice dangerously low. "I know," Grace said, tears streaming down her face. "I know, and I'm sorry, but I didn't know what else to do." Before the tense standoff could resolve further, one of the intruders lunged forward, grabbing for Elena before Marco, who had appeared seemingly from nowhere, intercepted him with practiced efficiency. Chaos erupted through the kitchen, Dante moving swiftly to secure the second intruder while shouting orders for additional security to converge on their location. Elena stumbled backward against the counter, her heart pounding violently as the brief but intense confrontation unfolded around her. Within moments, both intruders had been subdued and restrained, Marco securing the back entrance while additional guards flooded into the room, drawn by the commotion. "Are you hurt?" Dante asked immediately, turning to Elena with visible concern etched across his face, his earlier fury toward Grace momentarily forgotten in favor of ensuring Elena's safety. "I'm fine," Elena said, though her voice trembled slightly with the aftershock of adrenaline, just startled. Dante's hand found hers, a brief, grounding touch that seemed to steady them both amid the lingering chaos of the moment. He turned back toward Grace, his expression hardening once more, though something closer to weary disappointment had replaced the earlier fury. "We'll discuss what happens next," he said, "but right now, I need to know everything you told them, and I need to know it immediately." Grace, shaking and clearly overwhelmed with guilt, began recounting every detail of her contact with the outside party, confirming that whoever had orchestrated the leak was closely connected to Doyle's resurfaced operation, likely hoping to intercept the evidence before Dante and Elena could use it against him. As the immediate crisis settled into a tense aftermath, Victor approached Dante quietly, his expression carrying a complicated mixture of vindication and concern. "I should have caught this sooner," he admitted. "I was so focused on Elena as a potential risk that I overlooked someone who had been part of this household for years." "We all missed it," Dante said, though the weight of the near disaster clearly settled heavily on his shoulders. "What matters now is making sure it doesn't happen again." Later that evening, after Grace had been quietly relocated to a secure location for her own protection, given the very real threat now hanging over her family because of the coerced betrayal, the household finally began settling into a fragile calm once more. Elena found Dante alone in the study, staring at the folders of evidence still locked safely in his desk drawer, his expression distant and troubled. "You did what needed to be done today," Elena said softly, stepping into the room. "Grace's betrayal wasn't your failure. She was protecting her son. None of us can fault her for that, even if it put us at risk." "I know," Dante said, "but it doesn't make the danger any less real. Doyle knows more now than he did yesterday. He knows we have the evidence, and he knows exactly how close he came to intercepting it." "Then we move faster," Elena said, determination steadying her voice despite the exhaustion weighing on her. "We stop reacting to what he does and start deciding how to end this on our own terms." Dante looked up at her, something fierce and admiring flickering behind his tired eyes. "You've changed since that first night," he said quietly. "You're not the frightened woman who walked into my office anymore." "Neither are you," Elena said. "The man who locked that door isn't the same man standing in front of me now." A quiet understanding passed between them, forged through days of shared danger and vulnerability that neither of them could have anticipated when this entire ordeal began. Dante rose from his desk and crossed the room toward her, closing the distance with slow, deliberate steps, giving her every opportunity to step back if she chose. She didn't. "Whatever happens next," Dante said softly, "I need you to know that this isn't just about my father's promise anymore, or the debt written into that letter. It became about you somewhere along the way, long before I was ready to admit it." Elena's breath caught, the weight of his words settling over her with a warmth that cut through the lingering fear of the day's events. "I think it became about you for me too," she admitted quietly. "Somewhere between the locked door and this moment." The distance between them closed entirely, a quiet, steady embrace that spoke more clearly than words could, of everything they had come to mean to each other through the danger and uncertainty of the past days. For a moment, the looming threat of Callum Doyle and the evidence hidden in the study drawer faded into the background, replaced by a simple, undeniable truth neither of them could deny any longer. But the moment could not last uninterrupted. Marco's urgent knock at the study door pulled them both back to the reality still pressing in around them. "We have a problem," he said, his expression tight with fresh urgency. "One of the men we captured this afternoon just gave up a location. Doyle is planning something tonight, something big, and we don't have much time to prepare." Dante's expression shifted immediately back into sharp, focused resolve, though his hand remained protectively at Elena's back as they followed Marco from the room. Whatever tenderness had bloomed between them in that brief, quiet moment would have to wait, overshadowed once more by the urgent, dangerous reality of the confrontation now rapidly approaching, one that would finally determine whether the promise made 20 years ago between their fathers could survive the storm gathering to destroy it once and for all. The captured man had revealed that Doyle intended to move against the estate that very night, gambling on the assumption that recent chaos from Grace's exposure had left the household disorganized and vulnerable. Dante gathered his closest people quickly, Victor and Marco working alongside him with practiced efficiency to prepare a defense that would turn Doyle's assumption of weakness into a costly miscalculation. "I want Elena somewhere secure," Dante said, his voice carrying the weight of command Elena had first witnessed the night they met, though now it carried none of the coldness that had defined that initial encounter. "Somewhere Doyle's people won't think to look." "I'm not hiding while you face this alone," Elena said firmly. "This started with my father's ledger, and I intend to see it through." Dante studied her for a long moment, torn between the instinct to protect her at all costs and the growing respect he held for her refusal to be sidelined from a fight that had become as much hers as his own. "Stay close to Marco," he said finally, "and if anything goes wrong, you get out immediately." No hesitation, no second thoughts. Elena nodded, understanding the weight of his concession, and together, they moved through the final hours before nightfall, reinforcing the estate's defenses and preparing for a confrontation that had been building since the moment she first walked into his club with her father's letter. Doyle's forces arrived just after midnight, moving through the darkened perimeter with the kind of coordinated precision that spoke to years of experience in this dangerous world. Dante's people met them at every approach, the estate's careful preparations turning what Doyle had hoped would be a swift, decisive strike into a contained and controlled confrontation instead. Elena stayed near Marco as instructed, watching from the shadows of the study as the sounds of the confrontation echoed through the grounds outside, her heart pounding with fear for Dante's safety, even as she trusted in the careful planning that had gone into defending the house. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, each passing sound sending fresh waves of anxiety through her chest. Finally, the commotion outside began to quiet, replaced by the sound of approaching footsteps in the hallway. Elena's breath caught until Dante appeared in the doorway, disheveled but unharmed, relief washing visibly across his face the moment his eyes found hers. "It's over," he said. "Doyle's people were captured or driven off. We have him." "Doyle himself?" Elena asked, disbelief coloring her voice. "He made the mistake of leading the assault personally," Dante said. "Overconfidence or desperation. Either way, it's finished." Elena felt the weight of the past week finally begin to lift from her shoulders, though the full reality of everything that had happened would take considerably longer to settle into something resembling peace. She crossed the room and embraced Dante without hesitation, feeling him hold her just as tightly in return, both of them finally allowing themselves a moment of relief after days defined by nothing but fear and careful calculation. In the days that followed, the full scope of Doyle's operation unraveled swiftly once law enforcement, quietly guided by carefully anonymous information drawn from Elena's father's evidence, began investigating the corruption long buried within city offices. Names once protected by fear and influence finally faced consequences, the delicate balance of power that had allowed Doyle's operation to survive for so long collapsing entirely under the weight of evidence one careful accountant had risked everything to preserve. Elena and Dante sat together in his study one quiet evening several weeks later, the letter that had started everything resting once more on the desk between them, though the tension it once carried had eased into something closer to closure. Dante ran his fingers gently across his father's familiar handwriting, a small, reflective smile touching his lips for the first time in longer than Elena could remember. "He wanted this," Dante said softly. "Not the danger, not the years of secrecy, but this. 2 families finally free from a debt that never should have needed to exist in the first place." Do you think he'd be proud? Elena asked. Of how it ended. Dante considered the question carefully before answering. I think he'd be proud that his son finally understood what he was trying to protect all those years ago, he said. Not just a debt or an arrangement, but the chance for something good to grow out of something that could have easily destroyed us both. Lena reached across the desk, taking his hand gently in hers. I don't regret walking through that door, she said, even knowing everything that came after. Neither do I, Dante said, his voice carrying a warmth entirely unlike the cold command that had first greeted her in that same office weeks earlier. You gave me back a piece of my father I thought I had lost forever. And somewhere along the way, you gave me something I didn't know I was still capable of feeling. The quiet warmth between them settled easily now, free from the fear and urgency that had shaped every moment of their time together until this point. Outside, the estate stood peaceful under the soft evening light, security measures quietly returning to routine rather than crisis, the shadow of Callum Doyle finally banished from the life they were beginning to build together. What happens now? Elena asked, studying him with genuine curiosity, rather than the wary uncertainty that had once defined every question she asked him. Dante rose from his chair and walked around the desk, extending his hand toward her with a gentleness that would have seemed impossible to imagine on the night they first met. Now, he said, we figure out what it means to build something new, together and as equals. No debts, no obligations, just a choice, freely made. Elena took his hand, rising to meet him, and together they walked toward the study door, the same door that had once locked behind her, with the sound of ownership and threat now standing open, a quiet symbol of everything that had changed since that first tense night. Beyond it, the house remained calm and steady, the storm that had once threatened to consume them both finally settled into peace. The letter remained on the desk behind them, its purpose finally fulfilled, no longer a burden carried in secrecy and fear, but a bridge that had brought two families, and two people who never expected to find each other, into a future neither had dared imagine when this story first began, behind a locked door and a single, unexpected line, spoken with quiet, unwavering certainty. You're mine, he had said that night, meaning it as command and possession. Now, standing beside her in the soft evening light, he understood the words differently, not as ownership, but as a promise freely chosen, one Elena returned in equal measure, as they stepped forward together, into whatever came next.